All right, hello everybody. Miss Lynch here, as you might have guessed. I am back for chapter 13, part 2. Okay, I wasn't sure how the first one was going to go as far as length, but here we are. Okay, so like I said, I was going to pick up with the fugitive slave issue, and that's where we are. All right, so that's the slide I'm on. Should be slide number 19 if you're looking at your slideshow with me. Okay, so the Fugitive Slave Act allowed special federal commissioners to determine the fate of alleged fugitives without the benefit of a jury trial or even testimony by the accused individual. And we've talked about this before. The notion of if a slave were to run away, they would have to be returned to their enslavement. But it became very confusing about who was expected to enforce that, right? So this was meant to be addressing that, okay? So it is strengthened, and we have a reinvigoration of the Underground Railroad that will only grow until we get up to the outbreak of war, okay? So ironically, the South, which mostly favored states' rights, supported an act that gave the federal government great power to recover escaped slaves. And in a series of dramatic confrontations, fugitives aided by abolitionist allies violently resisted capture. The law also led several thousand Northern African Americans to flee to safety in Canada. All right, so Franklin Pierce is elected in 1852. He introduced a bill to establish territorial governments for Nebraska and Kansas so that a transcontinental railroad could be constructed. I mentioned in my last lecture, we'll have the completion of this railroad in 1869, but railroad expansion becomes very important to a lot of people in a lot of different industries during this era, right? Okay, so slavery could be settled by popular sovereignty. Territorial voters, not Congress, would decide. So let me just pause and take us to this next slide. All right, so Nebraska and Kansas, like I said, the railroad being built there brings a lot of attention to the area. Okay, and looking back under the Missouri Compromise, slavery had been prohibited in Kansas and Nebraska, right? So there's that, right? Okay, let's see. Um, Okay, so people are worrying about if this is in fact going to bring about, repercussions that would encourage it in other areas. All right, there's a Republican resurgence going on. Okay, so there's a lot of backing of our railroad network, like I mentioned. Okay, and two great areas of industrial production pop up during this time, this hits on what we've talked about before, but the northeastern seaboard and the Great Lakes region. Okay, this makes sense. Alrighty. Okay, there's the rise of the Know Nothings, who were an anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, anti-slavery. Wait, in the North they had anti-slavery sentiment. Sorry, but this group that is rising as a point of contention during this time, really just kind of reflecting a lot of animosity that's going on towards immigrants in the 1840s and 1850s, okay? Okay, Mhm. Okay, so this goes hand in hand with the abolitionist movement, but the free labor ideology, um, which is anti-slavery um, doctrine, right? Okay, so this is being pushed as an alternative, right? Okay, and yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the notion of free labor, okay? Anti-slavery, free labor. The not free as in not being paid, free as in choosing what you do with your career, where you want to work, what you want to do to a certain extent. You know, a lot of people will have to choose factory labor because that's what's available to them. But still, it is not slavery, and that's what's important. Okay. So that's what free labor, freedom to choose where you labor. All right. Okay. So um, we have the emergence of Lincoln, which we'll get into more as we go a little bit. So um, I will actually skip through these next two slides because we are going to talk about Mr. Lincoln a little bit more. Okay. Okay, so Lincoln and slavery. All right. Like I said, this is becoming the debate of the time. So this will define Lincoln's presidency for many reasons, because it will lead to a war and his ultimate assassination. Right. So this is the definition of his time and power. Okay. But so, yeah, going back to Kansas, this becomes the idea, just the discussion about expanding slavery is going on everywhere. Kansas is our hotspot at the time for this discussion. Okay. Okay, I feel like these two slides say that, so I'm going to move ahead. I feel like I'm going through this very quickly, but that is okay. This is all just about the 1856 presidential campaign, so I feel like it's fine. Okay. Okay, I think it's important to note here. So, yeah, Lincoln shared many of the racial prejudices of his day. He did not want to give African Americans the right to vote, but he did not exclude them from the human family in this large picture. Okay, so it's important to know that, yes, Lincoln will become known as the great emancipator, but this was still um, political at its core, right? Okay, so Douglas is reelected. Um, However, this will create Lincoln's national reputation that will eventually bring him to the presidency. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about John Brown at Harper's Ferry because this is a kind of pivotal moment leading up to our pre-war events. Okay. All right. So an armed assault by the abolitionist John Brown on okay, on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry in Virginia further heightens tensions going on during this time. Previously, he had led a group that murdered 5 pro-slavery settlers in Kansas. He was placed on trial for treason in Virginia, and his execution turned him into a martyr for the North. There's a good chance you've heard his name before, and I think that they just came out with a movie about him last year. Is that the Matthew McConaughey movie? I think that it might be. I think he might be playing John Brown. But anyway, okay, so yeah, he becomes this key figure um, in anti-slavery organization. Okay, this is then there's a rebuttal. okay, from the South. So more and more Southerners were speaking openly on Southern expansion to create a slave empire. So that's what's happening by the pro-slavery movement. Okay, and then this takes us to the election of 1860. All right, so at the 1860 convention, the Democratic Party reaffirmed the doctrine of popular sovereignty. Um, they split into two separate conventions 6 weeks later. So there's a divide even between the Democratic Party. Okay. Um, okay, and then the Republican Party nominated Lincoln. All right. Their platform denied the validity of the Dred Scott decision. It opposed slavery's expansion and added economic initiatives. There we go. Okay. So, in effect, two presidential campaigns took place in 1860. So there was Lincoln versus Douglas in the north, and then Douglas versus Breckinridge and John Bell in the south. All right, so basically what that all just says is that the country was very splintered during this time, okay? Okay, so without a single electoral vote in 10 southern states, Lincoln was elected, becoming the 16th president. Okay, and then this is truly where we're about to get into war, okay? So, Southern secessionists, their movement really rapidly develops in support, okay? So, the secession movement. Rather than accept permanent minority status in a nation governed by their opponents, the Deep South political leaders boldly struck for their region's independence. Okay, so in the months after the election, 7 states stretching from South Carolina to Texas seceded from the Union. All right, so this creates a crisis. President Buchanan denied that a state could, in fact, secede, and also insisted that the federal government had no right to use force against it. Okay, so there is this plan to the Crittenden Plan, which was proposed to protect slavery in the West, okay, so to the Pacific Ocean, basically saying the Missouri Compromise line, okay, so our north and south would go all the way to the Pacific, okay, so basically, so Kansas and south, Colorado and I guess that's Nevada, and then part of California. So like everything, it would be north, free north, enslaved south. Okay, so there's this um, idea put into action to make that real. Okay, but Lincoln rejected it because it would expand slavery. All right. Okay, so Lincoln assumed office March 4th, 1861. All right, and the Confederate States of America, the CSA, was formed before Lincoln's inauguration. Okay, so by our 7 most southern states, right? Jefferson Davis was elected as president of the Confederate States, and a Confederate Constitution explicitly guaranteed, um, here it says guaranteed slavery, the right to slavery within those states. All right. So, in his inaugural address, Lincoln denied the right of these states to secede. He issued the warning that in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the monumentous issue of civil war. Okay, so saying it ultimately comes down to the people and their actions um, that determines how affairs are handled, okay? All right, so he made sure the North did not fire the first shot. Okay, so after Confederates began the Civil War by firing on Fort Sumter on April 12th, 1861, Lincoln then called for 75,000 troops to intervene, okay, to suppress this insurrection. Okay, so the four upper South states, so Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia, seceded and joined the Confederacy rather than aid Lincoln in suppressing this rebellion. So they joined in on the Confederate side. Okay, so with that, the Civil War, the American Civil War, I should say, has now broken out. All right. So chapter 14 will take us through the events of all of this. Okay. So if you all have any questions about anything, please feel free to shoot me an email. And otherwise, I will be back. I'm going to record chapter 14's lecture on Friday morning. I think is going to be the first chance I have to do it. So I might not see it for a couple of days, but it will be here. Okay. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything, shoot me an email. And otherwise, I will talk to you later. Okay. Take care. Bye.